Hey girlies, Amber here. Before we jump into the show, I have something for you. That's right, it's a gift, something for free, just to make you feel abundant and wealthy. I put together a super chic, free to download net worth tracker. It's super cute and pretty, and it gets the job done. Listen, I've been tracking my net worth since 2016, and since then, it's grown by 677%. It's insane. And listen, it's not the net worth tracker that did it, but it is my attention to my big financial goals. And seeing it all on paper has given me the laser focus that I need to get really serious about my financial journey. Keeping track of your net worth is one of the most powerful things you can do to take control of your financial life, and I want to help you do that. So this is free to download. You can get it at oldmoneypodcast.com/networth, all one word. Drop your email. It'll get sent to you immediately. You just make a copy. It's in Google Sheets, and you can plug all your numbers in to see what your net worth is today. Again, it's oldmoneypodcast.com/networth. If you have questions about how to use it, go back and listen to episode 35. It's called Tracking Your Net Worth. It's worth its weight in gold, because that's what it really is. oldmoneypodcast.com/networth, and let me know what you think. Hello, rich girls. Welcome back to the Old Money Podcast. It's your host, Amber Frankusen, and I'm joined today by a very special guest, somebody you've been asking for. It's something we've talked about a little bit, but today we're really going to dive in with a retirement expert and former head of retirement solutions for JP Morgan Asset Management, where she worked for almost 30 years. This woman has been dedicating to helping young people retire on time and on target, and she's been gracious enough to spend time with us, the rich girls that listen to Old Money, to help us do just that. Not only has she been featured on Bloomberg TV, CNBC, in Forbes, Business Insider, Wall Street Journal, and now on the Old Money Podcast, she's also the author of the new book, Your Best Financial Life. Save smart now for the future you want. I'm so honored to welcome our guest, Ann Lester.
Amber, thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you. I have to say to the audience, first of all, I felt very fancy. I got a pre-release of your book before it even launched. It just came out this week, and it'll have been out for a week or two when we launch this podcast episode. But you guys, this is my first advanced copy of anything. And when I tell you, I read it in 2 days. It was so easy to digest. You can't see this because you're listening on audio, but there's tabs, there's highlights everywhere. I found it incredibly approachable. And Anne, I'd love for you to start by talking about your kind of vision of the different generations. Your approach of talking about the different struggles that different generations have gone through is so refreshing. What inspired you to write the book in this way?
True story. This is my third attempt at writing this book. The first one I started working on when I was still working full time, and it was okay. Actually, it was probably better than I thought, but I decided I hated it, and I moved on to a new idea. And that new idea was really, truly terrible. My son, who's now 26, was 23 when I asked him to read it. And he was just like, "Oh, Mom, it's interesting." I'm like, "Oh, man, that's what you used to say when you were like 8 years old and you'd spit something out on your plate. And we're like, you can't spit it out." And he's like, "Well, what do I say?" And I was like, "Interesting is good." Right. So that was not a good comment. And that and some feedback for some other people just maybe go back to the drawing board. But one of the things I was trying to do, I realized, was talk to too many people. If you want to write a book, it's got to be for someone, not about something.
Ooh, that's powerful.
One of my writing coaches gave me that advice. And so I spent a long time actually working with my agent to really distill down, what do I care most about? And the thing I care most about is helping people understand the consequences of the decisions they don't realize they're making.
Oh, wow. Oof. 2 truth bombs right off the top.
Right. I didn't write that in the book, right? Because that's just kind of like too big and large a thing. But compound interest, like the power of time, is something most people don't really understand until they're in their 40s and 50s. And it's like,
right.
you don't get a do-over, right? You can't go back and let me just start this again because I'll save more, right? It's too late. So that's really why I wanted to focus on millennials and Gen Zers. And then I've got, he would define himself as a young millennial and a Gen Zer as kids. And these are all the things I wished I'd known in my 20s and 30s. So that's where I ended up.
Right. And I really want to get back to your background too, Anne, because I find it so fascinating, and a story that I share with you as well about, working in a high-powered job, but and still struggling with money. However, I wanted to flag for our audience too, something that I found really amazing about your book, Anne, and I know I'll use it in this way for myself, is that you have these different topics and guidelines for different areas of finance or different time periods of your life where you could go back and reference this for, like, if you needed to set up a new 401k, here's what to look for. Or if you're going to determine whether to rent or buy, you have very clear guidelines in here that you can go back and reference to. Or if you're like, oh, I want to try out a robo advisor, like, here's the things to remember to go back and look for. So thank you also for writing it in this way, because I feel like it's a resource that you could go back to again and again as situations in your life change.
I'm so happy you feel that way. Thank you.
Absolutely. And going into your story, tell us a little bit about, you wrote this line that you were managing billions of dollars of other people's money, generating returns, and you could not do the same for yourself. What's your story, Anne? Take us back.
I know now, and actually I really kind of unpicked this for myself in doing the research for this book, which is kind of funny. I have always known I'm just going to say bad with money just sounds terrible, given all the clients whose money I manage, but it's really different managing your own money than managing other people's money. And I started gaining some insight into this back in the early 2000s when I started doing research for and built JP Morgan's target date funds, which is what was my job. And I started learning about behavioral economics. And, there've been a ton of amazing books written and Nobel Prizes won on this. But, there's a book called Nudge out there, or Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, all about how everybody is born with sort of brain wiring that makes it harder or easier to delay gratification, right? And there's like that famous marshmallow test that goes into that everybody maybe knows about. Um, what I didn't understand until I really started doing the research for this book after my son's interesting comment, I was like, oop, I got to go back to the drawing board, was that those sort of nature, like the way you're born, the way your brain works, right, also intersects with nurture, or the way what you learn as a child growing up. And I did not understand how powerful some of those lessons are that you learn as a very young child. And my parents, who are in their very late 80s now, grew up as kids in the Depression, and there was just no money. And I don't know, they're both kind of academics and maybe a little lefty liberal. And they basically thought we'd figure it all out, right? This is like Dr. Spock. And like, they were just like, we don't need to teach you table manners. You'll learn by observation. We don't need you how to budget, because why would you need to teach anybody that? It's obvious, right? Except it's not obvious. And my dad was a college professor, and, we were comfortable. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable. And there was always enough money for whatever my parents said was important to do. So when I graduated and, armed with that first credit card I got in college, if it was important, I thought it meant I could spend the money on it. And I just was never taught budgeting, right? So that lesson I did not learn at an early age. I didn't have a fixed allowance, right? If for anybody who's listening who's a parent, right? To me, the best thing you can do with young kids is give them fixed allowances, tell them what it's for, and give them control over it. Let it go. Let them figure out those lessons when they're young, the hard way, when you're there to pick up the pieces for them, because when they're in their 20s, it's too late.
I think what's really interesting, what you touch on, again, it's kind of these generational trends, right? Of the parents that grew up during the Great Depression, or for my grandparents during World War II in Europe, and then coming over to America with that kind of money trauma or story. And then they just kind of pass it along. And it's something we talk a lot about on the Old Money podcast, is that generational wealth is not just the business or the assets or the money that you give to your kids to inherit. It's these habits and these thoughts. So from a generational perspective, I think your story is similar to mine, and probably my parents have. We didn't get taught these things, and we were just supposed to figure them out. But unfortunately, there was a lot of pain along the way. So you share about that too. When you're living paycheck to paycheck, managing other people's money, what was really the impetus for you to change your financial outlook for yourself?
I just hated the way I felt. Like, I felt bad. I mean, I felt bad about myself. I felt shame. And I mean, ironically, it's, the fact that I felt like this all the time. And then when we started doing research to build the product in 2003, 2004, we were able to pull anonymous records of millions of people and see how they were struggling. And I'm like, oh, I'm not alone. That was just right there. It's like,
Wow.
oh, this is not a personal failure of mine.
Mhm.
This is like the world. And that
Right.
just was so liberating. It's just feeling like you're not alone with this stuff. So those insights then helped me, in contrast to some other providers out there who were saying, oh, everybody saves 10%. And, you'll never take a loan from your 401k and you'll never stop contributing. I'm like, I know that's not true because I took a loan out and I've stopped contributing occasionally. And, let me look into some data here. And it's really pervasive, people doing these things, because it's life, right? Life gets in the way. So
Yeah.
that to me was just so liberating, which then kind of gave me permission to say, okay, well, then you combine that with my brain wiring. So I'm not alone. I'm not the only idiot in the world who can't figure this out. It's not, the title of the second chapter of the book is You Suck at Savings and It's Not Your Fault, right? And it was like,
Right.
oh, wait, this is just like, I was born this way. It's how tall I am. Like, okay, now that I know that, how can I then take all these nudges and
Right.
behavioral things and make it harder for me to spend my money? So you asked about generations. One of the things that I think is really challenging, for super challenge for people in their 20s and even for their 30s, is it's a lot easier to spend money now than it used to be. That's
Right.
technology, that's social media. That is literally like, I used to have to write a check in the grocery store when I got my first job. They didn't
Yeah.
take credit cards. It's painful and slow to write a check.
100%. That's such an interesting point. I think also, there's so many changes generationally now too. And one of the things that I think you do a really good job of in the book is kind of explaining the perspective. I think a lot of millennials out there, a lot of Gen Zs are saying, we've had it harder than ever. I graduated from college in 2009. I missed the housing run up, and then I didn't have any money to buy a house that was foreclosed upon in 2011 because I couldn't get a job. And, all of these timings. And then Gen Z has the pandemic and all of these things. And we talk about an internal locus of control versus an external locus of control. Like, are we in control of the economy? What happens around us? No, but we can control how we respond to it. But what I like about your book is you talk about the things that other people went through at the same time, like our grandparents going through World War II. You talked about the Depression, or going through the end of the Cold War, the riots in LA. Talk to me more about that, because I think that's so interesting.
I think this is touching on something that is fascinating to me, which is that in some ways, every 20 something and 30 something, certainly in like since the turn of the last century, right, has gone through a very similar, like, our brains are developing, our prefrontal cortexes are like not very sharp and good until we're like in our mid 20s. Like, this stuff makes it hard for everybody, right? And then there's that whole learning curve about adulting that happens, right? And
Right.
so in some ways, every generation goes through that. And every generation has their own struggles and trauma, whether it's, the economy. I mean, the economy does go through cycles, and just about everybody has had in their 20s or 30s some terrible thing to deal with, right? I grew up with my parents going to gas stations in the 70s on odd or even days because gas was being rationed. And I know people are like
Right.
complaining about the dollar cost of gas. It's cheaper now in inflation adjusted terms than it's been in almost any point in our history. We forget that, right? There were some pretty terrible societal things. So we've all got these things, but one of the reasons I tell those stories is to help people understand that when we frame things and, oh, look how good it was back then, right? It never felt easy to the people then in the moment.
Okay, this is so powerful because there's two like parallels here. Every 20 or 30-year-old person struggles and sucks, and we all complain. We all think we have it worse. And then yet you also, on the other hand, shared with us that secretly we're all feeling shame. We're all, breaking these money rules all of the time. We're being told to do things in a certain way and we can't comply, which I think really kind of dovetails clearly into creating more anxiety and more shame and all these things we're supposed to do. So, okay, again, thank you for being here. We need you. We need to talk about how to survive this, because I have often also felt that same amount of, upsetness and disappointment of like, why is it so hard for me? But the reality is it's hard for everyone in each generation.
I think that's true. And I think it is even more difficult, truly more difficult for Gen Z and millennials, let's call it under 40s, not
Sure.
just because that's like we're all going through that growth arc in our lives. And it was, you hit your 50s and 60s. research shows we become more happy, become more health. Like that's been true forever, but social media and the ability to benchmark yourself against other people. I talk about this a little bit in my book. Like I had a bad case of lawnmower envy for the across the street neighbors because they had an electric lawnmower and we didn't. So we had a push lawnmower and we had a kind of bumpy, hilly front yard, and it was hard work to mow that
Yeah.
lawn with a
Yeah.
push mower, especially when the blades hadn't been sharpened. Um, and they got in a car with electric windows and air conditioning. And my parents are like, we're not spending money on that. Okay, so they spent money on music lessons for me, right? And they made choices based on money and values that I respect now. But as a kid, there was
Yeah.
no conversation about, well, if you want piano lessons, then we're not going to get a new car, right? That
Right.
conversation never happened. It was just electric cars, air conditioning is stupid. We don't need it. All right, I guess. All right. Thank you for the like. I mean, it's a bad way to frame things, I think, for kids. They learn things that you don't want them to learn.
100%. And I also think just from our parents' perspective too, I'm not even a parent yet. And sometimes I have articulating to my partner, like why I can't explain to him why I don't want to eat that thing right now. And I can't imagine having children running around and having to explain every nuance of every decision you make. It's an interesting dichotomy, right? Of like, we wanted our parents to give us more, yet being in their shoes, that's a tall order.
Well, and then add being hangry on top of it. Nothing good happens before dinner. Um, the other thing though that's really interesting, right? If I could benchmark myself with literally our across the street neighbors, and that was my benchmark, and then you'd get the teen magazine or whatever, and you'd look at the glossy pictures, but they were just unreal and on another planet. Now stuff is in your face constantly about what other people are doing. And I think we just it's this whole consumption creep thing I talk about, right? We start benchmarking ourselves and feeling like we're not enough if we can't do X, Y, or Z. Now, behind the scenes, we have no idea what's going on in people's personal financial lives and the mess
Right.
they may or may not be in, right?
Or if they're carrying a fake Goyard instead of a $3,000 real one, we have no idea. Everything looks different on social media. So interesting. And I think that's a really good segue to the next thing I want to talk about, which is the way that our mind kind of plays tricks on us. We got money on the mind, right? You talk a lot about how the brain gets in the way of us making good financial decisions. I've coined it as a term for the podcast as financial fight or flight. Like when we are in fight or flight, we make bad financial decisions. You tell us, as you mentioned in the book, that we suck at savings, but it's not our fault. And you mentioned it briefly, but can you explain the marshmallow experiment for people who haven't learned about it? Because I find this fascinating.
Yeah, there's been a little bit of shade thrown on that study now because of demographics, and they were all children who were going to the Stanford nursery school. So, okay, you had a
Sure, sure, sure.
particular demographic control group, but I think the statistics of how many people failed and succeed may not be representative of the whole world, but the actual test itself is really valid, which is at a very young age, we are through this combination of nature, the way our brains kind of are wired, and nurture, which is how we trust the system and the lessons we've been taught. Like we just respond to temptation differently. Some of us have a sweet tooth, some of us don't. Some of us can say, no, thank you, and walk away. Some of us can't. And some of us really cannot pass up a sure thing in front of us, even if waiting meant we'd get more later, right? It's the bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, right? If I have something in front of me now, I better grab it because that future thing is uncertain. So the experiment was in a nursery school, right? They got a bunch of 3 and 4 year olds and they said, look, we're going to give you each one marshmallow. And the adults are going to leave the room and you can eat it if you want to. But if you wait until we come back, you'll get a second marshmallow and then you can eat 2 marshmallows.
Very tempting.
And then they followed these kids through life. And the ones who could resist eating the marshmallow ended up being able to save more money. They got better grades in school. They were able to delay gratification.
Oh, that is so triggering for me.
And now we know so much about stress and about trust, right? So some of those kids, it wasn't necessarily that they were born. Some of it also then was layered on with like if people, air quote, fail the marshmallow test, and it's not failure,
Right.
it's just understanding how you're wired. It might be because they grew up in a food insecure household, and if you got a marshmallow, you better eat it because your older brother's going to
Right.
steal it, right? Or so there's a whole bunch of stuff in there that's not quite just brain chemistry, but it's the point I think still stands that at a very young age, we already have developed a pattern of behavior around temptation. And I hate the framing of failing. There's no failure here. It's just, be curious about how you're wired.
Right. And obviously that's a very clear indication to, your impulse to purchase instead of save, or your impulse to spend instead of invest, and how that ties together. What's fascinating for me is that it was this longitudinal study that they followed people, and there was actually a marked difference in their savings rates. So what happens, Anne, if we're a hungry marshmallow eater? Just we're wired that way. We're the ones that have that bird in the hand. We're eating the marshmallow. You talk a lot about money types. How do we rewire that after kind of learning about who we are? What's the framework you use?
I don't know that you can actually rewire yourself. I think what you can do is start. I talk a lot about hacking because I think,
Hmm.
the shortcut is, if you're going to eat the marshmallow and not wait, then don't put it on the table.
Yeah,
Then you
right,
won't eat
right.
it, right? And so for me, with money personally, it's the thing I just keep coming back to is, and for anybody who's had the pleasure of taking a child to a birthday party in a bowling alley, they put those bumper guards in, or being
Yeah,
that child in the bowling alley so you can't have
sure.
a gutter ball. What can you do with your financial life that lets you put the bumpers in the gutters so you don't end up there? And the reason I go through these money types is because different people, and this is where I invite anybody listening to be curious, right? There's no right or wrong, there's no good or bad. It's just, how do you respond? And when you know how you respond, then you can start figuring out the best hacks to use.
Yeah. And I would love to just take a moment to talk about some of those bumpers. We've talked about them on other episodes. But for me, things that have happened in the past when I've been in debt, needing to pay it off, people say turn off your Apple Pay, turn off your autofill on your Google so that you don't have that easy fill. Well, I knew my credit card numbers by heart. I had to call the bank and ask for new credit cards so that I didn't have them in my brain. And then I got the new credit cards and I put them in an ice bag in a Ziploc, put them in the freezer, and actually froze them. I have to unfollow all of the shopping, the influencers, the people that are trying to sell you things all of the time. When you go to the store, you go with a list. What other bumpers do you have, Anne? Because I think this is really powerful.
I think you touched on a bunch of great ones. And the overarching principle here is slow yourself down. Put
Yes. Yeah.
sand in your gears, right?
Love.
Make
Yeah.
put a circuit breaker in that interrupts, right, the I want, I do, unconscious spending. So you hit on some fabulous ones, like turn off anything that's spending automatically. Turn off anything that lets you buy thing with one swipe, right? I used to have my credit card number memorized too. I don't anymore. I hadn't realized, that was powerful. Lists are great.
Yeah.
Something else with online shopping that I think is really good is only do it once a week in a designated place with a list.
Oh, interesting. I love that. Okay.
Like,
That's a
I
great tip.
can't do this now because I'm not, I mean, there are arbitrary rules and you can break them if you need them, right?
Yeah.
Some respects they are made to be broken, but like, hey, I can't be, if you commute to work on the train, on the bus, right? Swipe, 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 because guess what? You start feeding that impulse. So it's really about thinking, how do I starve myself? How do I cut that impulse off? I think subscriptions you touched on, like unsubscribe from everything.
Right. I want to also just everybody out there too, and this is something I always want to balance, is that we are not prescribing a terrible, boring life. Anne actually has a whole chapter in here that's talking about living well. And that's not something that we're saying, okay, you have to have a restrictive life. You don't get to have what you want. It's about being intentional about where you put your money so that you can have, the two marshmallows instead of one. You get to make bigger decisions, better decisions, and have more control instead of having these money leaks that really leave you in a lurch at the end of the day. So,
I love that because it's, what are you doing without thinking about it that doesn't actually make you happy, right? I will occasionally, and food is a great analogy for me because this is also something I struggle with, right? It's just like, when do you find yourself mindlessly munching something? Like, in the moment, fine, you did it, whatever, let it go, move on. But okay, well, when I sit in the kitchen, if I sit at the kitchen table and read a book, I want to munch on something. I'm not a big watcher, I'm a big reader. But okay, so all right, I can't sit at the kitchen table and read. I just can't because then I start eating, right? So what are those things
right.
with money that you do? I think are helpful. I think another thing to look at is, I talk about one of the spending types is the ostrich. Like, I just don't want to look. I don't want to know. It's too painful. Um, Accountability partners are fabulous. Have a buddy and ask them to help figure out what's the thing you fear doing. And then just ask him to send you a text. Hey, I really want to check in with my spending once a week. Can you just send me a text and ask me if I've done it?
Rich girls find each other. Yes, we need these accountability partners. Yes.
And you don't have to be sharing all your business with somebody, right? Just, hey, I
Right.
have an intention to review my finances Sunday night. Like I always dreaded Sunday night, not just because it was, I had to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to go to work the next day, but also because that was my designated bill paying night, which in hindsight was a mistake. Like don't make Sunday night your finance night because
Right.
it's already grim enough if you've got the whole get up and go to work thing. Even if you love your job, which I did, it's still like not fun, right? So yeah, don't pile up unpleasant things on top of each other would be another tip.
Such a good point. You mentioned the ostrich, and that goes into the money types that you've identified. Can you describe to our audience what are money types? How do we find out who we are?
Well, there's a quiz on my website, which is my name, ANNELESTER.com, with a couple of the tips from the book in there that you can take the quiz. It's not super scientific. It's really just, there are these archetypes that we fall into, right? And they can be, I call the oversubscriber is one. And that, we've talked about a little bit, like you just find yourself with 7 streaming services. Like, I'm sorry, you are not watching something on all 7 streaming for services like every week or every month, probably. Like
Right.
you can get one for a month, watch everything you want to watch, and then wait. It's okay. Maybe one you can keep. I don't know, but you don't need them all. Accidental spenders, right? We talked about consumption creep. Like when you got your first job out of college, you might have been sharing your house. You might have been eating ramen, like living a pretty frugal life. And without even thinking about it, every time you get a raise, you let your spending increase by the same amount.
Yes.
Best hack there. Promise yourself that you will save half of every future raise and don't let yourself consume all of every raise or windfall like a bonus or a tax refund.
That's a great one.
That's another one. Yeah. And you may fall into more than one bucket. It's really, do these behaviors sound familiar to me? Do they resonate with me? And how can I think about maybe not going down that road?
100%. So in doing the quiz in the book or reading through them, I'm a combination of a splurger and an accidental spender because I will be very conscientious with my money all month long and I'm following my budget. And then something happens and I'm like, of course we're going to get the upgrade at the hotel. And I blow all my money. And then I'm like, wait a minute. I'm poor again. How did that happen? And then at the other side of it too, the accidental spenders is, I think especially, and I used to be much less conscious about this, but having a high pressure job, having stress, it's like at the end of the day, you're like, oh, I can't cook. Of course, I deserve to have DoorDash. I worked so hard today. And then that adds up and I'm not conscious about it. All I'm doing is trying to eat, but the amount of money that I'm spending, it's just accidental. So it can be uncomfortable to see yourself in this book in a way of like, oh, that's my bad habit. But Anne gives some really practical, helpful tips of if you fall into this category or if you resonate with this archetype, here's some ways to kind of hack your brain to break that cycle. So I love that.
Thank you. I think most people fall into more than one bucket, frankly.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I was like, I could see myself in any of these, but probably most of those. Now, and one of the things I don't want to monopolize your time today, but I wanted to just flag for people here. You were the head of retirement solutions for JP Morgan Asset Management. So you guys, this is the woman you need to talk to if you have questions about retirement. And I guarantee you a lot of them are answered in the book. But you said something that I want to jump into, which was the fact that you set up the target date funds at Chase. I'm a huge fan of target date funds. It's something we haven't touched on the podcast yet. Can you explain to people what those are and how they could utilize them?
They are, I think, really, really powerful ways to invest money for long-term goals. Retirement is the classic. And they're designed to change how much investment risk they take as you get older. One of the things that happens, and it's really common, is people either pick something when they sign up for their 401k plan and they go, okay, well, that looks good right now. And then they never look at it again. Okay, that's bad. That's bad because, you might not have diversified, right? Gotten the right mix of stocks and bonds, the right mix of international and domestic stocks. It's also bad because as you get older and you get closer to retirement, the amount that you can afford to lose, right? We call it a time horizon as investors changes. And so if you're 30 or 40 or 50 years away from retirement, you can take a lot of risk. If you're,
Right.
5 years away from retirement, you should be risking less money. And so a target date fund does this all automatically for you. And the name is the date you are targeting for retirement. So if you want to
Right.
retire in 2060, you buy the 2060 fund. Many 401k plans now will actually, when you start a new job, automatically put you in a target date fund unless you say you want to do something different. And I think for most people, that's a great thing to do for a couple of reasons. They automatically rebalance and they automatically take care of this de-risking and they automatically are diversified. So if you don't love investing money or aren't very good at it, you don't have to go there. The second thing they do, which is super powerful, is I think it's really important to spend your mental and emotional energy on things that will really matter. And you said something really important earlier, which is that we can't control what the economy does. We can't control what the markets do. We can control and manage how much risk we're taking. And I think target date funds do a really good job of helping you figure that out. But if you are also trying to manage your money, you're spending all this mental energy worrying about the markets and should I pick the index fund or the active fund? And I don't know. And boy, you get really caught up in this decision fatigue
Yes.
and it takes your energy away from the single most important thing you can do, which is spend your energy on figuring out how you can save enough. And it's a total fake to spend all this energy on. Most people do a much worse job managing their money than the professionals will. Not everybody, but most people. So like just don't go there. Save your energy for saving money because that is going to really help you.
I totally agree. And one of the things about that too, as we talk about and demystify people's impressions of what it means to invest, if you are going to be an active investor, that does not mean you're a day trader. You should not have to look at CNBC and watch the stocks and have your phone like making crazy moves. We should be learning to utilize the programs, the funds, the systems that are put in place that help us automatically rebalance so that we can focus on living well, not being super stressed out about money and things that we can't control all of the time. And so just to kind of piggyback on what Anne was saying too, from a risk perspective and a rebalancing perspective, I just wanted to bring some color to that. If you're about to retire, you're 64 and you have all of your money in, I don't know, random stocks that you picked, and then we have a black swan event like 2008 or like COVID again. If you are 64 and you have all of your money just invested in all stocks, all individual companies, and the market crashes, the day that you turn 65, you don't have that money anymore. So when we talk about rebalancing things, it's about reallocating where your money is invested into less risky, whether it's the asset class like stocks or moving to bonds or whatever it might be. It might be in the types of investments that you're in, whether you're in large cap stocks in the US versus international funds or REITs. And so when you look for a target date fund, and every financial institution has them, whether you're at Chase or Vanguard, Fidelity, et cetera, they are a super powerful tool. We need to talk about this more. I'm so glad that you brought that up. And I can't believe you're the one putting them all together. Like, that's fascinating.
Well, I was not the first, but we were the best. No, listen, any sort of reputable financial services company, as you just said, Amber, is offering one. And it was funny when my son got his first job. He's like, "Well, should I use these target date funds? Because you used to say they weren't as good as yours." And I'm like, "Honey, any target date fund is better than you do this by yourself. Trust me." So,
Totally.
look around, find a institution you think is aligned with what you want to do and where you are, and it's fine. Don't overthink it.
Well, one of the things as we kind of wind down today, Anne, I want to touch on something that our rich girls have a lot of questions about because we talked a lot about saving. We talked a lot about holding back our impulses, not eating the marshmallow, but we also want to learn how to live well. And there are some guidelines that you have. For example, I hear you have a criteria of ways to determine if a luxury item is worth the splurge. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, and it's something I try to do a lot because I love nice things, and I try to be very honest with myself about when and how I'm going to use it. And something that actually my coach taught me, which is really helpful, is like see the movie in your head and then ask yourself, is this a fantasy? In which case I can fantasize for free, right? I don't need to pay money to have my fantasy happen. Or is this actually really nitty gritty going to be like something I actually use? And then do a little gut check and ask yourself how many fantasies, if it's clothing, are living in your closet right now that you don't wear.
Right.
And maybe, it's just a way to give yourself permission to play with the fun thing without actually spending your money on it. It's okay. Like I buy a lottery ticket once in a while. It's not because I think it's a good financial decision, because I can guarantee you it isn't. But $2, and I'm like, yeah, wouldn't it be fun if? Like it's never happened. But going window shopping is a fun way to play as long as you manage that. I have to buy it. I think you can almost always find a different alternative. But if you really think you want it, don't buy it today. Don't buy it today. Put it in the shopping cart.
Slow yourself down.
If you're
Yeah.
physically shopping, ask the person to hold it for 4 hours, 6 hours, 10 hours, and walk away. And then if you cannot let it go, if it's still calling at you and you can afford it without running up debt, yeah, maybe.
Okay, I love that. Just the cooling off period, putting something on hold. I haven't done that in ages, but that's such a hot tip because when you're, especially in these luxury stores, now they're applying you with champagne. Do you want a cappuccino? Do you want a macaroon? You're like, yeah, of course I do. You get really caught up in the moment. I've definitely been guilty of that.
There's a reason that they do that.
I know. It makes it so fun.
It's not really free.
I love that. And also you had touched on something so important. What are some of the questions we need to ask ourselves before we tap into emergency savings? Like, should I be doing that for my new Chanel purse?
Okay, so question number one, is the need for your, hypothetically speaking, new Chanel purse unexpected?
No, it's
Was it
always been
was it
expected.
predictable that you could have needed this? In which case, why aren't you saving for it? So no, you
Mhm.
shouldn't buy the new Chanel purse. Second, do you have to spend the money?
Okay. I mean, no, not in this case. You're making me feel really sad now, but I understand. Okay. Question two, do you have to spend the money?
And then number three, do you have to spend the money now?
Okay, so it's all about, is it expected? Do you have to spend it? And is it urgent? Those are the criteria. And so for my Chanel bag, it's a resounding no.
If it's a no for any of them, you should not be spending the money. So I run through a whole bunch of examples in the book, but one I think is a classic is a new phone. Like, and there's a sad story about Christine on her way to her friend's wedding who drops it down a sewer grate, and it's like, okay, you got to buy a new phone. All right, that's an emergency. What if the phone battery is dying? Do you need it now? Do you have the money? No. Okay, go buy a $20 rechargeable battery and get that phone limping along for another 3 months until you can save up for it. It's not an emergency.
Right. What are the other alternatives to kind of be that stopgap? That's a good one. That's really true. I guess I'll just put some duct tape on my Louis Vuitton. Oh my God, I'm such a bougie bitch. But I totally understand it. It's a ridiculous analogy that I say about the Chanel bag too. And one of the things that I see, especially for women, are rich girls who are so invested in the fashion and the things. A lot of this urgency is created by the companies to encourage us to tap into spending. So, Chanel just announced they're going to raise their prices again. Hermes is doing the same thing. They had 18% profit growth last year. Hermes did, and they are saying we're raising our prices. And this is drawing people to the store to go get their bag before the prices go up. That's a false sense of urgency. Same thing with fashion. It changes every season. It's in limited supply. They're doing that to us on purpose. There isn't actually an emergency there.
So it's not saving money if you can't afford it.
Right.
You're just not. And it's a fallacy to get stuck. As you say, they're just trying to make you do this. I talk about this in terms of investing money in the book. Like if you feel stupid asking questions about it, if you feel like this deal is going away, that's a red flag that should tell you to stop right there. And that's true for
Absolutely.
people like, trying to get you to Venmo money or whatever. Like if it feels like it's an emergency, unless it's your best friend or your mother, like red flag right there. Do not do it.
100%. And be wary of deep fakes through AI, but that's a whole nother
Yeah, that's a
conversation.
whole other conversation.
Anyway, Anne, one of the things that I want to touch on really quickly before we wrap with you today is, we've talked a lot about saving, investing, and we love to talk about making more money here on Old Money as well. And we have a lot of entrepreneurs, we have a lot of teachers, we have a lot of people that I think might have a book in them that they need to get out into the world just like you did. So I'd love to kind of take a different direction for a moment. And can you talk to us about the process of writing the book? I love that you said this is the third iteration. That's so honest and real. What's this process been like for you?
Far harder than I thought it would be. And I have an unpublished novel and like to write and
Okay.
like to think I'm good at it. And it was really hard. If people seriously want to buy a book, you can put a link to this in the show notes. This is a woman that I've worked with and taken her class, but this book is brilliant. It's called Write a Must Read, Craft a Book That Changes Lives, Including Your Own. And it's by a woman named AJ Harper. And it's a great kind of hand-holding step-by-step. How does the publishing industry work? I don't think you write a book to make money. Like at best, I hope, break even on the book. If you write a book, it's often a way for entrepreneurs and for people with big ideas to expand their platform, to get paid to speak, to build a consulting business off of. So I would encourage you not to fantasize about I'm going to make money on my book royalties, because you won't. But I think it can massively help people transform their business. And it's the act of writing the book that is transformational. Right?
Mm.
You learn more about yourself, you learn more about your business. It really forces you to think hard and deep about what you're doing and how you're doing it, which is why it was so painful for me to write this book, right? I mean, it was on personal and like, what do I really believe is important levels? It really is a distillation process. So just specifically, like, I've always wanted to write a book since I was a kid. So this has always like been a dream of mine. Like I said, I had this unpublished novel from like 25 years ago. The process, I ended up working with a collaborator who I probably wrote like a quarter of it myself. He probably wrote a straight up quarter of it. And then we collaborated on the other 50%. So I knew I couldn't write a book by myself. Like I just didn't know how to do it. I do now. If I write another book, which I hope to do, I probably won't use somebody.
Yeah.
Took me 7 years.
Amazing.
Uh, that whole thing about failing the marshmallow test. Did I have a writing schedule? Did I have did I write for 2 hours? No, not really, because I suck at that sort of
Yeah.
thing. I'm really terrible. Um, I got a book agent through a woman that I was introduced to while I still worked at JP Morgan, who helps business people and entrepreneurs like take ideas into books. So I spent money to do this project and I had the money to fund it. I think getting a book agent is very difficult if you don't have a personal introduction.
Yeah.
I did see rejections, and I simultaneously got enough yeses that was not totally demoralizing, but I still have a stack of rejections from my novel that I still fantasize about
A
rewriting and
little
publishing
salty.
someday.
Yeah. I think this is fascinating and such a good insight too. I think, a lot of people, like I said, I've even gotten letters and DMs from some of the listeners about, how do we write a book or start a podcast or do the things? And it's all about the process. It's all about going through it and figuring out. And that's why I spend so much time prepping for shows and figuring out how I feel about things before I say them out loud. And a book, you have to be even more intentional. It's going to be written, printed forever. I find it to be really impressive. And I love what you said too about expanding a platform and giving people another way to connect with you. But then you can leverage that into, as you said, speaking or giving keynotes or being on TV and being an expert in your field. It's great.
Yep. And I wrote it because I really want people to read it. But to me, it's about creating the platform to have conversations like this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it's about the message and getting it into as many hands as possible.
I love it. Well, the book, everyone, again, is Your Best Financial Life. Save Smart Now for the Future You Want by Ann Lester. And I'm obsessed with the book. Before I let you go, will you do some rapid fire rich girl questions with me?
Absolutely.
Okay, I love it. Here's what we want to know. This is all the important stuff, right? Not where are you investing your money, but where's your favorite place to vacation?
Italy.
Ooh, where in Italy? We're going in June.
Oh gosh, everywhere. My husband's half Italian. We lived in Milan for 5.5 years. I speak fluent Italian. So anywhere in Italy, I'm like in my happy place. But I can't pick. There are too many fabulous places.
I love that. Yeah, so you're definitely giving me under the Tuscan sun vibes. I can see that for
Yeah,
you.
it's phenomenal. And then I did a pilgrimage walk from the Swiss border to Rome 2 years ago. And
Wow.
so like I have many new favorite places now. That was yeah,
Amazing.
amazing.
Okay, what's the best investment you've ever made?
The best investment I've ever made is, this sounds so hokey, in myself.
Love. It's
Gonna say
true.
hiring a coach to help me understand more about why I behave the way I do has been the single best investment of my life.
What type of coach have you worked with? What should people Google if they're looking for someone like that?
Oh, I could not even tell you. I got him first through JP Morgan,
Okay.
because I'd gotten a big promotion and I knew I was going to screw it up if I didn't have somebody managing. Like I knew I was reacting to people badly, and it was more
Yeah.
about understanding my own impulses, I guess. I wouldn't even know how to begin to characterize it.
Okay, well, I will have to double down on that too. I continue to say the best investments that I make are the ones in helping me be a better version of me. I work with a mindset coach. I work with a business coach. I work with a therapist. We cannot do this alone. It takes a village.
And for writing a book, I got to say, AJ Harper is a business book coach. I mean, she's phenomenal. Like, I'm a big believer in finding good courses. I worked with speaking coaches to become a better public speaker, right? I just
Right.
not only makes you better, but gives you confidence so that you know you're going to do a good job.
I love that. Okay, what's your guilty pleasure, Anne?
Reading romance novels, and if they have vampires, even better.
Oh my God, I'm obsessed. We have so many girls in the rich girl community that are just obsessed with smut and book talk, and we're big fans. Maybe we should start like a side book club that's
Ooh,
not
I like that.
business.
Yeah. Paranormal stuff, like urban fantasy. I love all of it. Yeah.
Amazing. What advice would you give 21-year-old you?
Really? To lighten up on myself,
Oh,
probably first and foremost, and then to like read my book and do it.
follow this program.
Yeah.
And last question for you today. And thank you again so much for being here. What in your life makes you feel the wealthiest?
Okay, I had a hard time, so I'm going to tell you two answers here.
Okay, love it.
Truly, one is having someone who I value enormously in my life, which is the team of young women who come and clean my house.
I love
Like,
that's
I really
amazing.
hate cleaning my toilet. Like, I feel I really hate doing it, and I really value the people in my life who do things I just like doing, and that's probably like house cleaning is like got to be like over the top of my list. The second one is not having to check my bank balance before I make it a purchase. Like,
Mm,
I feel wealthy. And honestly, since I left my fancy schmancy job at JP Morgan, like, we have less money and we've ratcheted down our lifestyle, but we did it really consciously. And so now I know, like, don't do that anymore. Don't take that kind of trip anymore. Don't go buy clothes anymore. So I made decisions, right? They were very sort of thought through. And now I'm like, yep, I want to live my life so that I don't have to keep checking my bank balance because that makes me feel really poor.
yeah, absolutely. That's so good. And the book again, Your Best Financial Life, where can people find you?
Oh, everywhere. You can find links to purchase at all the places on Amazon, on Goodreads, on all the independent bookstores. And you can find me on my website, annlester.com, and with an E. And then you can also find me on social media on every platform, I think, pretty much. Save Smart WN.
Love it. So if you guys are listening to this episode, you found any value in it, take a screenshot, post it on socials, tag Old Money Podcast, tag Save Smart W Ann with Ann. You guys get it. We love you so much. Thank you for being here, Rich Girls. We'll talk to you on the next episode. And thank you again. Feeling rich? I hope so. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Old Money. If you have questions you want answered, email me at oldmoneypodcast@gmail.com or hit us up on social. We are at Old Money Podcast and I am at your service. If this episode spoke to you, inspired you, helped you, if you took a single note, it would mean the world to me if you could please just take a minute to rate and review the podcast. And if you're not doing so already, subscribe. And if you have friends who like getting rich, please share this episode with them, even if it's just on your Instagram story. And I'd love you more than Jeff Bezos loves Amazon Prime. Thank you so much, and I will talk to you on the next episode. Remember, I'm not your lawyer, I'm not your tax professional, and I'm not your financial advisor. The content presented in this podcast is intended to entertain, educate, inspire, and support listeners in their personal and professional development and does not constitute business, financial, or legal advice. In addition to that, this episode may contain paid endorsements and advertisements for products and services.